Welcome to my podcast. I am coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I live with my husband, Andrew, and our dog, Iggy. You can find me on Ravelry as Hey, I'm Kathryn Knits, and you can find me on Instagram at Hey, I'm Kathryn _the podcast. So, welcome! Today is Friday, April 14th, 2017. It's Good Friday, and it's actually not a bad Friday. It's cloudy and a little bit windy, but yesterday it was snowing. And it's snowing elsewhere in our province right now. So at least it's not snowing here yet. I'll take it. It should be quite apparent at this point that I really don't know what I'm doing. But I'll figure it out as I go, I guess. I've been watching lots of knitting and crafting podcasts over the last several months, and I thought they looked like fun. So I figured I'd try my own, because why not? So here I am. So a little bit about me and about this podcast. The general theme of this podcast is things that I'm learning and things that I'm trying and things that I'm making. So today is going to be quite heavy on knitting because that's what I've been doing the most of. But in future episodes, I hope to talk about embroidery and cross-stitching and sewing and crochet and any other kind of artsy craftsy endeavors that I might undertake. So we'll see how that goes. So like I said, I've been knitting quite a bit over the last several months. I have wanted to learn to knit for probably 10 years. And I would get the bug to start, and I would go and get books and needles and yarn and sit down and try and teach myself, and I would get as far as casting on and garter stitch, and that went great. And then anything beyond that was just impossible for me. I couldn't purl, I could barely bind off, I couldn't knit in the round, so I would get really, really bored and really frustrated really quickly, and I would stop. So in October of 2016, I decided I was going to give it another shot, and picked up my needles again and got as far as garter stitching and then could not get any farther and got a little bit frustrated again. So I went to my local yarn store here in Calgary and I signed up for their Knitting 101 class and I signed up for their Crochet 101 class in January of 2017 and I loved them and I took to it instantly. It's amazing how much easier things are when I'm shown them as opposed to trying to teach myself. But I figured things out and now I just love knitting. I'm obsessed with it. I want to knit all the time. So let's start talking about what I've been making. Not a whole heck of a lot, but before I did my knitting class, like I said, I had my book and I was practicing my stitches, and my original idea was that I was going to go through all of the stitch patterns in the book, and once I had mastered all of those, then I would move on to a project. Well, that very quickly became boring because I couldn't figure out how to purl, so I couldn't do any stitch patterns with any kind of reasonable accuracy. So I was like, screw this, I'm just going to start a project and see how it goes. So like most knitters, I started with a scarf. I went upstairs and went to my stash, which I will talk about later in this episode, and I grabbed a ball of yarn that I liked the look of and I liked the feel of, and it was a relatively good size, so I knew I could do something big with it, and I grabbed some needles and cast on and decided I was going to knit a scarf. So my first finished object ever is a scarf. It's technically not fully completed because I still have to weave in my ends because I didn't know how to do that when I actually finished this, but now I do, so I can finish it. But I actually have a complete finished object, and hilariously, when I picked up the ball of yarn, I was initially concerned that I wouldn't have enough to make a scarf. So I was like, as long as it'll wrap once around my neck, I can button it and it will be a cowl. This scarf is like 3 feet long. And I was worried I wouldn't have enough. But anyways, here we are. So I didn't know what the yarn was when I picked it up. now based on how it looks and how it feels and kind of what I've picked up from other things, I know that it's an acrylic yarn, and it's an acrylic novelty yarn. It's 2 strands of different colors that are twisted together. So one is a light minty green, and the other is a light icy blue, and they're twisted together so you get kind of like these bumps in your yarn. So this actually gave me a lot of trouble when I was trying to figure things out, because this yarn was a remnant. It had been something else and had been frogged and wound together into a ball. So I didn't have a ball band. I didn't have anything. So I didn't know what size needles I should be using. So I just kind of grabbed some and hoped for the best. And it didn't turn out well because the needles were too small. So as I was stitching, all the little bumpies were getting caught on each other and my stitches weren't moving. I couldn't actually do anything. So it took me 3 tries to find needles that were the correct size, and so I ended up knitting on size, they're size US size 11. They're 8mm straight needles. These are 14-inch straight needles, and they're plastic, so they were really nice and light. But this is what I ended up knitting on, and I just kind of cast on and held the needle up against my neck to figure out how many stitches I should cast on, and went for it and went back and forth. So it was not obviously an overly difficult project, but I'm quite impressed with myself because I didn't drop any stitches, I didn't add any stitches, and I cast on and bound off and in a reasonable manner, and I only have this much yarn left. Like, that's it. So I think I did pretty well in terms of yarn chicken, and I have like this really nice, super soft, squishy scarf because of the thickness of the yarn. Like, it's so soft and fluffy and it's fantastic. So it sat upstairs all winter because I didn't know how to weave in my ends. So I kind of missed most of scarf weather, but it is ready to go for next winter. So I was really, really happy with that. And it kind of gave me a boost to start another project, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because it is actually a work in progress. I haven't finished it yet, but that's okay. I do have one other finished object. So in March, I started watching the Skein Game podcast, which is hosted by Chantel, who is Knit Pearl Dog on Instagram, and she's another Calgary knitter. Hi. And she wanted to do a knit along, and she wanted to do a mosaic knitting knit along. So she went onto Ravelry and she found a free pattern that was relatively easy and posted it and said, let's do a knit along. And so I had already finished my knitting 101 class and I'd had a little bit of practice, and so I figured I could probably handle that. It was just knitting and slipped stitches. So the pattern that Chantel chose is a free pattern on Ravelry, and it's the Turkish Tiles Slip Stitch Dishcloth, and it's by Rebecca Yeager. And when I printed it out, this pattern is quite long, and I was really intimidated because, like, it's just nonstop, like, words all the way down the page. It's a lot to look at, but then once you actually get going, it's really, really easy to pick up the pattern, and every second row, you just follow the row that you immediately did before. If you can read your knitting, you won't even have to look at your pattern. So it actually wasn't that hard. So I went upstairs to my stash again, and I picked 2 random balls of yarn. This one, I have no idea what it is. It has no ball band. I assumed that it was fingering weight, but it's actually not. It's a little bit lighter than that. I assume it's an acrylic just because of the way it feels, but I didn't mind the color, and I have it, and it's free, so why not? And I also picked, look at that vintage label. Like I said, I will talk about my stash later on, but a lot of the stuff that I have has vintage labels on it. So this is definitely 100% acrylic. And I cast on, and I ended up with a dishcloth. Yay! It's not really a dishcloth because I knitted out of acrylic, so it won't like absorb water. I can't really use it like that, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it as like a hot pad for putting hot plates and stuff on to protect your table, because it is thick enough for that. But anyways, this is the pattern. It shows up much more nicely on camera than it does in person. In person, I actually find it a little bit hard to pick out the pattern. The back obviously has no pattern, but it's still nice. Like, it's not terrible. So this is three pattern repeats, and each pattern repeat is 32 rows. So it is a quick knit. This I ended up stretching out over the course of a couple of nights just because my hands were a little bit sore. But if I was sitting down now, especially having done one, I'm going to do a second one. And I could probably knock that out in like a movie, like a couple of hours. And I'm not a fast knitter. I am a slow knitter still because I still have to kind of think about things. I'm not that intuitive yet. So it is not a difficult pattern. It does not take a long time. And this is probably going to be my go-to dishcloth pattern for the foreseeable future. I owe my mom a couple of actual knitted dishcloths, like out of cotton, which I have upstairs. So I think this is the pattern that I'm going to use just because it looks so nice. And I mean, it's finished relatively nicely, and this is just part of the pattern. Like, you don't need to do anything fancy to finish it. So anyways, I'm going to do a second one in these yarns and in these colors, and then I'll have a matched pair. And that will be that. So I knit these on my Chiagu interchangeables. I have the stainless steel tips. These are the 5-inch tips, and these are US size 7 or 4.5 millimeter needles, and they were pretty much perfect. I just went based on what was on the ball band for my yarn because the pattern kind of really doesn't specify, and I do think that this is a pattern that no matter what size yarn you're using, it will size up appropriately. So you could probably make that work, I would assume, but who knows? So those are my very first finished objects, which made me kind of happy. So now moving on to works in progress. So after I finished my scarf, I was super jazzed that I actually started and finished something despite having like almost no skills, and I didn't want to wait until my class in January to keep going. So I went back to my local yarn store and I had found a pattern. I went on to the Knit Picks website and I just searched all of their free patterns and beginner, and I wanted something bigger than a scarf. But since I couldn't knit in the round, I couldn't do like a cowl even, really. I couldn't do a hat. I couldn't do anything. So I was like, I'll just do a blanket. A blanket is like a scarf, but bigger. And I can probably do that. It'll just take me longer. So I went onto the Knit Picks website and I found this free pattern, which is the Knit Beginner Blanket. And so it is just garter stitch back and forth, and it's 4 colors, or kind of as many colors as you want, I guess. And it makes a 50-inch by 60-inch blanket. So I thought that in order to endear Andrew to my new hobby, I would knit him a blanket. So I went to my local yarn store and I picked up all of the yarn I needed. And it was, when I picked it up then, it was a 20 skein project. 5 skeins times 4 colors. So this was going to be a big one, because it needs to be long enough for Andrew to tuck under his feet and wide enough for him to wrap around himself. Andrew's quite tall. He's like 6 feet tall, and he's built like a football player. So this could not be a lap blanket. He's not a lap blanket kind of guy. So lots of skeins of yarn, and I cast on 210 stitches, which is what they tell you to do, and then you just go back and forth in garter stitch for like 120 something rows, and then you switch your yarn and do that again for 120 something rows through 4 colors. So I got 3 skeins into the first color stripe and I will never finish this. This is the most boring project of all time. And each row was taking me like 35 minutes to do. So this project, it was never gonna end. So I was like, I need to do something else. So I frogged all of it. I ripped 3 skeins of yarn out and wrapped them up into a ball and thought for a minute. And I was like, I bet I have enough to do kind of a patchwork block blanket, but knit instead of quilted. So I cast on 60 stitches and started knitting, and I ended up with a block like this. So this block is about 14 by 14. Give or take a little bit. I need to stretch the top out because my bind off is much tighter than my cast on. But I picked 4 colors, and I'm just using Uptown Worsted. This is a 100% acrylic yarn, and honestly, I'm not a yarn snob. Like, as long as it isn't super scratchy and gross, and even if it is super scratchy and gross, like, I will still use it. If I have it, I'm going to use it. for pretty much everything. There's one exception that I can think of that I will talk about in a future episode. But I mean, this is nice and soft. It's machine washable. It's relatively inexpensive. Like, this is $7 a ball or something like that. So, I mean, not everything needs to be super expensive like merino cashmere or silk mixes. Like, there's a place for everything in every project. And this is going to be a big one. So, I needed to make sure that things were kind of under control in the cost department. So, I picked 4 different colors. So, there is white glow. There is baby blue, there is royal blue, and then this is Uptown Worsted Mist, and it's called bright blue. And it is a marled yarn, so it's a mix of blue and white, and the blue is variegated. So it goes from a very, very light blue all the way down to the royal blue and then back. So it exactly matches the baby blue and the royal blue colors that I chose. So I started doing a bunch of blocks. I'm doing 4 blocks per row and then 5 rows to make up my blanket. And then as I started going, I started worrying that my stripes weren't going to be exactly the same from block to block. So then I was like, I need to kind of space them out a little bit, and I'd learned to crochet by this point. So I was like, I figured I would do all of the blocks and then I'll crochet them together and then do a crochet border, and it will be really nice because I don't really like how this garter stitch edge looks. I mean, it's fine, it's not super wonky or anything like that, but I just think that crochet gives a much nicer edge to a project like this, but that's just my opinion. So I started going and started knitting and knitting and knitting and knitting and ended up with this. This is my blanket. It doesn't look like a blanket, but it is. Now, one thing that I didn't think about when I was doing all of these stripes is how many ends I would have to weave in. But here we are. So I have finished 4 rows of blocks completely. I have about 2 1/4 blocks left to finish my 5th row. And then I need to weave in all of my ends and block them out a little bit, and then I can start attaching them together. So I started this project the week between Christmas and New Year's. I figured it'll take me like 3 or 4 weeks. It'll be done by the end of January. It'll be fantastic. No, it's April. It's the middle of April. And I'm still working on it. Now, full disclosure, I've taken, obviously, breaks. I did the Skein Game knit along, and I have another work in progress on the go. So I haven't been doing a whole lot of knitting on this, but my goal is to work on it this weekend. I have one more work in progress I need to finish first, but I want to work on it this weekend, like 3 solid days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and we'll see how much I can get done, because I do want to finish it. I want to be able to give Andrew a blanket that he can kind of curl up in. I mean, it's not, I have to keep going. I'm so close to finishing right now, and also, if I frog it all, I'm going to end up with all of these like little tiny bits of yarn. I can't frog it and get like a whole skein back the way I did the first time, so I need to keep going. We are past the point of turning back now. So this is my longest work in progress. I don't know that I'm going to undertake a knitted blanket, an adult size knitted blanket anytime soon. Even just doing knit stitch, this has been a much larger project than I ever could have imagined. And it's kind of good that I didn't know how much work it would be when I started, because I don't think I would have started it then. I just would have like knit scarves nonstop for the rest of my life. So ignorance kind of was bliss in this case. But anyways, so this is my work in progress. So I'm hoping that by the next episode, I will have moved forward and I'll have something else to show you. And I am knitting these on Chiagu interchangeables. Love my interchangeable tips. Again, the 5-inch long tips. And these are the US size 9, 5.5 millimeter tips. So that is one work in progress. Second work in progress is a sweater, because if you can't finish a blanket, why would you not start a sweater? So at my local yarn store, they have a class called Guided Sweater, and you sign up and you pick whatever pattern you would like to work on, bring all the materials you need for that pattern, and the teacher is there to help you if you get stuck or to give you tips, but it's not everybody in the class doing the same thing at the same time. You're kind of working on whatever you want. So because I knew I didn't want to do blankets and scarves forever, I figured why not sign up for a sweater class and get going. So I went on Ravelry and I found the Simple Collection by Tin Can Knits. So Tin Can Knits is two women, one of whom lives in Canada and one lives in Scotland now, and they wrote a pattern collection that was supposed to get you through your first of everything. So if you pull these patterns up either on Ravelry or on their blog, they have all kinds of tutorials and blog posts that will help you get through every step of that project. So I picked the flax pullover, which is a worsted weight pullover sweater, just a top-down, like, raglan sleeve sweater. They also have a cardigan, which is the harvest cardigan, and they have the same sweater in a fingering weight. If you wanted something a little lighter, it's called the Flax Light. So the reason I picked it is because it is easy. I needed something easy. I need like an easy win for my first sweater so I can start and finish it. But this pattern is just really neat because all of the Tin Can Knits patterns have an enormous size range. They size them for everything from a 6-month-old baby, so like newborn, all the way up to a 4XL for an adult. So you can have your one pattern and you can knit it for literally every member in your family. Like, look at how cute they are, all in their matching sweaters. So when you get your pattern, all of these little blue blobs on the internet are clickable links. So you click on the little question mark guy and a tutorial will pop up or it will redirect you to a blog post that they've written about the technique. So it's very, very helpful, except I'm not working from like an online pattern. I'm working from a paper pattern. So I have been having some struggles with this. Most of them are my fault because I just can't read and have no reading comprehension. So the first time I cast on the sweater, I didn't have the correct size circular needles. So I had gone and purchased a whole bunch and then had gauge swatched and had to actually go up 2 needle sizes to get the correct gauge. So now all of a sudden I didn't have the right size needles and my local yarn store didn't have them. So I tried to do a modified magic loop for my collar, which did not go well because I had done magic loop once ever. And it was just pulling in a really weird way. I was getting a lot of laddering in more than one place on my collar, and it wasn't going to look right. It wasn't going to look good. So I ripped it all out, and I found double pointed needles in the correct size because I knew I could use double pointed needles, and cast on again, and did 2 rounds of knit stitch, and then started my ribbing, and got all the way through my ribbed collar, and then went, wait a minute. You're supposed to start ribbing right away. So I went back and looked at my pattern, and yes, indeed, you are supposed to start your ribbing right away. So because I had done 2 rows of knit stitch, all of a sudden my collar wasn't stretchy enough to fit over my head, so I had to rip it back and start again. So cast on again, started the 3rd time, got through my collar, did the ribbing perfectly, started doing increases to get ready to increase for my raglan and my shoulder. And then I went, I'm supposed to increase my needle size at some point in here. Yes, I was, like 3 rows ago. So I ended up ripping all of it back, and I was going to try to save it so I could just put in my needles and upsize, and I couldn't do it. So I ripped it all back and started again. So the 4th time I started, I cast on, I make it through the ribbed collar, I make it through the increases, I increase my needle size, I start setting up for the kind of the only detail in this pattern is a garter stitch band along the outside of the sleeve. So I started setting up the stitches for that, and I just kept getting really confused and doing things in the wrong place. And I kept making mistakes and dropping stitches, and I couldn't fix them, so I ripped it all out. And now it is sitting in my knitting bag, like in the naughty corner, thinking about what it's done before I go back and like attempt it again. So this is going to be my project for next week because the class is over. I'm now 3 classes in, so I've done 6 hours of instruction, and then I've stayed after class a couple of times to work on it. So I'm about 8 hours into the sweater, and I have literally nothing to show for it. Nothing. And I have 2 classes left. So I need to get going on this so I actually have something. So it is a simple project. I just need to read things more carefully. That is the take-home message from all of this. It is a well-written pattern. There are a lot of supports online if you are working from a laptop, or if you have an iPad with you, or if you want to put stuff up on your iPhone or whatever. The issues that I've been having are me, not the pattern, just to be clear. So I picked this pattern because it was simple, because there was not a lot going on, but also I knew I wanted to use a hand-dyed yarn. So I would have to be alternating skeins to ensure that there's no pooling, or to minimize the amount of pooling that happens. And I didn't want to have to worry about that while also staying in pattern. I figured one new thing at a time. So the yarn that I'm using is 100% merino, superwash merino. It's a worsted weight, and it is from a local dyer. Well, not super local, but she's from Lacombe, Alberta, which is just a couple hours north of here. And her name is Melissa, and she is the dyer behind Prairie Dye Studios. And she's on Instagram and on Etsy. And this colorway is called Columbia Icefield, which is a bunch of glaciers kind of a few hours north of here in the mountains, and it's a beautiful place to go. If you've never been, you should. But there are all of these like teals and aqua and a little bit of gray and a little bit of cream, and it's a beautiful, beautiful yarn, and it feels lovely and it's squishy. So I'm very, very excited. I think this sweater is going to look fantastic when I actually get it done. This is one of the many gauge swatches I had to do, but this is just kind of how it knits up in mini. So yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic. Like the teals and the grays and a little bit of cream keeps it light. It's going to look wonderful when it's actually finished. So that is my second work in progress. And my third work in progress is the one that I need to work on the most, because I want to have it done by the end of the day today. Let's see if that's actually going to happen. So on Ravelry, I am a member of the Pin Feathers and Pearls podcast group. So Pin Feathers and Pearls is a podcast hosted by Candace, and she's another Calgary person. Hi. And she started hosting a sock knit along in the beginning of the year, and it closes today, April 14th. So 2 weeks ago, when I finished my dishcloth and was kind of flipping through Ravelry, and I saw this knit along, and I was like, I could probably do that. So I had taken a class that was knitting socks cuffed down on double pointed needles. And I figured I could probably replicate that at home and do it again. And I could probably do a pair of socks in 2 weeks if I worked on nothing else. So I decided to think about it a little bit. And that night, I literally dreamed about casting on striped socks. So that is the kind of person I am now. I dream about making things, which I never used to. But here we are. So I went upstairs to my stash, and I found a ball of just heritage prints from Cascade Yarns. Not expensive, like superwash merino nylon blend. I think it's like an 80-20 blend. It's nice and soft, and it is striped. So I cast on, and I actually finished my first sock. So I don't have sock blockers, so my hand is going to be my sock blocker, but imagine that it's not my hand. So I did make a couple of changes to the pattern. So the pattern that I'm using is Wise Hilda's Basic Ribbed Sock, which is a free pattern on Ravelry, and it's by Kate Atherley. This is making me laugh because it looks like I have a hand puppet on, but anyways. So this is the pattern that we used in the class that I took at my local yarn store, and I found it really nice and easy to follow. It was very helpful that my teacher took us through the pattern and was like, this little bit is probably extraneous, you don't really need to pay attention to it, and she gave us some tips and tricks for getting through some things. So I figured since I only had 2 weeks to get these socks done, I wanted to pick a pattern that I already kind of had some experience with. So this is what I went with. I made two changes so far. The first thing is I decreased the length of the leg of my sock. You're supposed to do like 7 or 8 inches, and I don't like really tall socks. I always end up folding them over and pushing them down. So I only did 4 inches of leg. And then for the toe, you're supposed to do your decreases until you have 8 stitches left, and then just snip your yarn and pull it through and pull it tight like a drawstring. But I have really long toes, and since I was knitting these socks to be a little bit small on my foot, which is what you want to do for socks, you want them to have negative ease, I knew that I would end up poking a toe through that little hole. So I just kept going with decreases and made like a pointy little bind off, like a little Latvian mitten, which I think is kind of cute actually. So those are the only two changes that I made. Did I make mistakes? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I ended up wrapping my stitches the wrong way. When I was slipping stitches on the edge of the heel flap, I ended up slipping the stitch the wrong way. So I had this like weird wrapping thing going around. And then when I had to pick up stitches to kind of reestablish my gusset, I ended up doing that backwards, which is why there's like the blue line along the edge of the gusset. That should not be there. And then my teacher had mentioned that one of the things that people don't like about doing a heel flap and turn is that you end up with a hole at the top of your gusset. So she's like, if you make one, then that will close that hole. So that's what I did, but I forgot to knit the make one. So I didn't actually make one. I made a yarn over. So I made a bigger hole. Instead of making the hole disappear, I made it worse. But that's okay, because this is my first pair of socks. They're for me. I kind of don't care if there are mistakes in this one. But anyways, I figured out what I was doing wrong, and I've managed to fix it for sock number 2. So I cast on. Sock number 1 took me like 2 days to do. I cast it on, and I made it all the way through the leg in the first day. And then I did the heel flap and turn, reestablished the gusset, did all of my foot in day 2, and then the morning of day 3 I did my toe decreases, and that was it. So it took me like 2 days to do. Sock number 2 is taking me a little bit longer. It has taken me 10 days, and I have just finished the heel flap and turn, and I'm just starting. I've done the first round of gusset decreases to work onto my foot. This knit along closes at the end of the day today. So I need to get all the way through the foot of my sock today. Can I do it? I don't know. We'll find out. But I did manage to fix my slip stitch problem. So now both sides look the same, and I was able then to pick up my stitches properly so I don't have that weird like clear demarcation line where it's like this is where you picked up stitches. And I also remembered to knit my make one stitch. So hopefully things will kind of tighten up. So these are striped socks. I didn't worry about kind of winding off a little bit of yarn so that my socks would match perfectly. If I was going to do that, since my first sock started on like this variegated blue stripe, I would have had to wind off about an inch worth. I'm really glad that I didn't, because I was pulling from the center of the ball and I made it through the first 4 stripes, and then there was a red stripe, and then I started going backwards in my stripe pattern. So I assume that this red stripe is the very center of the ball of yarn, and now I'm working backwards. So these socks will be sisters. They will be twins. That is fine with me. I don't mind. So yes, I'm hoping to get these done so I can enter them in the Pin Feathers and Pearls knit along. I'm also going to enter these in the Grocery Girls podcast year-long sock knit along for April. Because I know exactly why this pattern says spring to me and is also a striped sock. So I'll get an extra entry from that. But anyways, I need to knit like the wind. Knit like the wind today. So we will see how that goes. So those are all of my works in progress, which is a lot. But right now, my Ravelry favorites list is large and in charge. Like, there is so much that I want to cast on. So I think I'm going to have to limit myself to like 3 works in progress at a time for knitting. And if I don't do that, I'm just going to cast on like everything. And then I'm going to have 1,000,001 works in progress. And it's just not going to be a good scene. So I need to finish some stuff, but we'll see what I can get done today and this weekend. And before I move on too far, the socks I am knitting on Chiagu double pointed needles. They're the 6-inch double pointed needles, and these are the US size 2 or 2.75 millimeters. This is actually 2 sizes bigger than the sock that I knit in my class, despite using the same yarn, which is the same weight. So I don't know why my gauge is so different at home versus in class. But anyways, I figured it out, and hopefully the socks fit me. Fingers crossed, because I haven't actually tried them yet. But anyways, onwards and upwards. So I've made a couple of mentions about my stash. Most of my stash is not super interesting. The vast majority of my stash is stuff that I've inherited from other people. My mother-in-law was a knitter, as was her mother as well, and they both had to give up crochet and knitting because of arthritis in their hands. So they had all of this yarn and all of these needles, and my sister-in-laws are not sisters-in-law, are not interested in knitting. They just don't have time. So I was interested, and I figured I would take it. So the vast majority of my stash is stuff like this. Unlabeled balls of random yarn, some of which feels nice, some of which does not, but it's free. I also have a bunch of yarn that I inherited from my grandmother because my mom doesn't knit, and my grandmother did a little bit, but then also her hands got quite bad with arthritis. So she stopped, but my mom kept all of her stuff and then gave it to me when my grandma moved. So I have a lot of stuff from her as well. Most of the stuff from her is labeled, and my grandma did a lot of knitting with like cashmere and mohair and angora, and so like soft, kind of really fluffy, fuzzy yarns, which is great. So that is the vast majority of my stash. A lot of yarn and knitting podcasters have like recent acquisitions, flash your stash. I don't know how interested people are going to be in seeing like ball after ball after ball of stuff like this. And I'm really trying not to accumulate an enormous amount of yarn beyond what I already have. I am trying to purchase yarn with a purpose. Like, this is what I'm going to make with this yarn. So we'll see how well I do at that. But I did have a birthday in February, and so with my birthday money, I signed up for several yarn clubs. So the great thing about a yarn club is you sign up, and then at some point in the future you get yarn, and it's a surprise. So I will have several of those to kind of go through the next several months, which is great. So the first 2 of those I'm going to show you today. So the first yarn club, the very first one that I signed up for, is by Allison Barnes, and she is a dyer out of Edmonton. She's Allison B Collection on Etsy, and she's Allison Barnes Collection on Instagram. So I signed up for her March yarn club, and what she ended up sending me is lovely. So she named this colorway Dirty Leprechaun, which I think is hilarious. So I mean, obviously March people were going for like the Irish kind of theme, but I like that she went with, this is like a tealy bluey green. It's not like a Kelly green, like a green green. And there's 2 kind of different weights of color. We'll say one is dark and one is light, like a light aqua, and then there's like a gold color in here, which is obviously the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and the gray is the dirty part of the Dirty Leprechaun. So this yarn is super squishy. It's a superwash merino nylon blend. So it'll be great for socks, although I don't think I could bear to put this on my feet. I think I'm gonna end up with a lot of shawls, I think. Based on what I've seen, like dyers turning out, I look at stuff and I'm like, that's too pretty to put on my feet. I can't put it on my feet. So we'll see what this becomes. But anyways, it is a really beautiful, soft, squishy yarn, and I love the colors that she chose. And like I said, they're not your typical like St. Patrick's Day March colors, which I really, really like. And she also included tea. So Irish breakfast, of course. I can totally get behind yarny people sending tea around. I used to drink so much tea on the weekends. When I was in university, I would drink nothing but coffee all week. And then by the time I got to Saturday, my guts hurt so much. Coffee was not good for me, but I drank it because I needed to stay awake. So I would drink tea on the weekends to kind of give my body a break from the coffee, but I would drink like pots and pots and pots and pots of it. So looking back, I now realize that I needed so much caffeine to keep going that the tea just wasn't cutting it for me. But now that I'm getting sent tea, if I get tea with every yarn club, here for it. So I'll have to start drinking tea again. And then she also sent 2 really cute little stitch markers. So I'm going to hold them up super close in front of my face, in front of the camera. So they have like these really pretty beads which match the colors in the yarn, which is just such a perfect detail. And so this one, the little charm, is a little tiny key. And this one, the charm says, made with love. And the thing that I love about these is that they are not only a stitch marker, which, I mean, they're big. Like, you could fit them on giant needles. Like, not this big, but, oh my god, that big. So this is, like I said, is an 8mm US 11 size needle, and they fit. Like, that is a giant needle. But because they are French ear wires, you can also open them and use them as a progress keeper if you wanted to, which I think is just a great option. You see lots and lots of progress keepers with the lobster clasp, which is fantastic. But if you're doing something like with a super bulky yarn, you need something like this, something that is large enough to fit around that. So these are going to be super, super versatile, and I love them. And they're super cute, and they're like a little match set, and I just think they're fantastic. So yes, that is Allison from Edmonton. Thanks, Allison. And the second yarn club that I signed up for is Vivid Yarn Studio, and she is Julia, and she's a dyer here in Calgary, so super, super local. And this was the first club that I ever received, and I was a little bit nervous because you don't know what you're going to get. And I had really been drawn to certain things, like I was doing lots of blues and little bits of pink as we started getting into spring, and that's like the yarn that I was really super in love with. So I was a little bit worried that I was going to get something that I really wouldn't like. But this is what I ended up getting, and I should never have been worried because this yarn it's like my ideal, perfect, beautiful, wonderful yarn. So this colorway is called Jelly Beans, and it takes all of my words out of my mouth, and I just can't even say anything. So it has the most wonderful colors. Like, there's this beautiful bright orange. There's like the really dark, dark purple. There's blue, and there's pink, and there's green, which is like this fantastic green speckle, and the cream is just perfect. Like, it's a perfect cream. Oh my god. This is so, so pretty. This is most definitely going to be a shawl. This is never going to be socks. This has to go into a shawl just because I think it would be the perfect complement to so many other yarns. There's so many other colors that you can pull from it. And then with the cream, it's still so neutral. It's perfect. So she also included tea, Zestfully Green from David's Tea, which I've never had David's Tea. I think I'm probably the only knitter who has never tried it, but I've never had it. So I am looking forward to trying that for the very first time. And she also included a stitch marker, which again is giant, which is wonderful, but it's super, super light, so you could totally use it for a lighter weight project. And it's a little 4-leaf clover with a little green and white bead, but it's a 4-leaf clover for March. So I just think that is wonderful. I love that. So anyways, those were the first 2 clubs that I received of the several that I was able to sign up for, and I'm now super pumped to see what I'm going to get in the future because those are gorgeous. Like, I can't wait to knit with these. I can't wait to figure out something to make with them. I'm so excited. So the last thing is not something that I purchased, which is super, super exciting. So I was going through Ravelry and I was looking at patterns as I often do. And I favored a lot of patterns that I don't necessarily have the skills to do now. But I assume that I will at some point in the future, and that's like a goal for me to work towards. So I went and I found this great raglan style sweater that's like a baseball tee kind of thing. So the body is one color and the arms are another color. And I was like, that is a perfect basic. There are lots of great patterns on Ravelry, and I mean, everyone has different tastes, but if I'm going to put the time and the money and the effort into knitting a sweater, I want it to be something that I'm going to wear. There are lots of sweaters that I think I would love to look at, and I would love to see them on other people, and they're just not my style. So I was going through and I favorited this sweater, and then a couple of days later I got an email saying that there's a Ravelry download available for me, and I didn't know what that was because I hadn't purchased anything, so what would I be downloading? So it turns out that I was the 500th person to favorite this sweater pattern, so the sweater designer gifted it to me, which is outstanding. And stuff like that never happens to me. Like, I enter knit-alongs mainly because it pushes me to try different things. I have no expectation that I'm ever going to win. That's just, I don't win things in general. Like, it's kind of a running joke between my husband and I in that he will both enter something and he will win almost every time and I will never win. And so maybe that's just because I'm married to him and he always wins, and there needs to be like a karmic balance in the universe. But anyways, so stuff like this never happens to me. So this pattern is called the Not a Star Trek Sweater, and she gives like a little explanation of why it's called that, which I found like just a really cute, funny story. But it is it's a great basic raglan sweater that you could do in one color, you could do it in two colors, you can make it short sleeve, 3/4 sleeve, like there's a lot that you can do with this. The pattern is really comprehensive. I'm obviously not going to show you the inside because it is a paid pattern, but the pattern is super comprehensive, and she also has like little pictures to help you with stuff, which I always appreciate in a pattern. So the pattern is by Mona, and her name on Ravelry is Mona Lacana. And thank you very much for gifting me this pattern. It made my whole week. And looking through her other patterns, I do think that there are other ones that I'm going to purchase from her because I think I'm going to like her style. But anyways, stuff like this never happens to me. It's amazing. So thank you very much, Mona. You made my day and my week and the rest of that month. So that is everything that I had to cover. I made it through all of my little notes. So this is episode 1 done. This one is obviously very knitting heavy because, like I said, I have been largely knitting for the last several months, but I do want to kind of branch out into other things. I have a sewing machine upstairs that I've owned for like 8 years, and I've used it maybe 3 times. I've never even serviced it because I've never used it, so I haven't really had to. So, I mean, I do want to try other things and talk about other things. I have stuff for beading and handcrafting and cross stitch and embroidery and sewing and all kinds of things. So I hope that you will join me for episode 2. I do have a Ravelry group for this podcast, so if you search for Hey, I'm Kathryn, the podcast, it will pop up. And everything that I talked about, I'll make a little post on Instagram as well. So yes, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you next time, which will probably be in about 2 weeks to give me time to work on stuff. And I hope everyone has a happy Easter and a wonderful weekend. See you next time. Bye.